Step away from the car. Ma'am, people like you don't drive classics like this." The words cut through the private garage like a blade, and in that instant, a future was sealed. Officer Ryan Keller would not know it yet, but this single sentence would burn down his career, his reputation, and every ounce of authority he believed he owned. He lunged forward with the speed of a man convinced of his own righteousness. His hand clamped around Eleanor Hayes's arm. He yanked her away from the open door of her Cadillac so hard her rebuilt shoulder jolted with a sharp burst of pain that forced a gasp from her throat. The hood of her own car struck her chest as he shoved her forward, pressing her into cold metal as if she were an intruder breaking into someone else's life. 50 years of discipline held her spine steady, even as humiliation washed over her in a slow, burning wave. Before we begin this story, where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe and give this video a like. It helps bring hard truths to light and keep stories like Eleanor Hayes's alive. Eleanor Marie Hayes stepped out of the private elevator with the quiet confidence of a woman who had walked through 6 decades of storms and survived them all. She wore a red silk dress that caught the low light of the garage with a soft shimmer, the color deep and strong like courage pressed into fabric. Her gait was steady, elegant, and unhurried. At 68, she moved with a calm that came from a lifetime of refusing to bow to anyone. Her Cadillac waited in its reserved space, shining in its candy-red pride, a symbol from her first triumph when Hayes Tech went public. She touched the chrome with a gentle stroke, the way another woman might greet a beloved family treasure. It was the one indulgence she allowed herself, a reminder of how far she had come from the Harlem streets that once tried to swallow her whole. She slid into the driver's seat, ready to head to a quiet dinner, when the sudden splash of blue and red lights flooded the concrete floor. Tires screeched, metal echoed. Officer Ryan Keller burst out of the cruiser before it even stopped. He moved with a charged hostility that filled the air like static. He barked his command, already convinced of her guilt before he saw her face. Eleanor raised her eyes with a level calm that came from experience older than the officer's entire career. She spoke with the patience of someone who had endured worse. "Officer, this is my car, my garage, my building." Her voice was clear, controlled, certain. Keller's expression tightened at her confidence, as though assurance itself offended him. He demanded registration. She handed him documents that carried her name, her titles, and the power of a $42 billion empire. His response was a smirk of contempt and a dismissive shake of his head. Nice fakes, probably printed in some basement on Canal Street. His tone carried an old cruelty, sharpened and familiar, behind him. Officer Isaiah Jenkins watched with growing dread. He had seen the name Eleanor Hayes before, not on a traffic report or city file, but in the internal directory reserved for senior command. She was the mother of Chief Olivia Hayes, the mother of the most powerful law enforcement officer in New York City. He wanted to speak, but fear pressed his voice down. The silence would cost him sleep for months. Eleanor kept her composure. She had lived long enough to recognize the moment a man's pride overruled his judgment. She breathed slowly, the way she had learned to breathe on the march lines of 1968 when police swung nightsticks into crowds demanding dignity. She knew what came next. Keller moved with a sudden force, grabbing her arm with unnecessary aggression as if restraint proved authority. He spun her around. Her shoulder throbbed under the pressure. The warmth of the Cadillac's hood met her chest as he slammed her against it. The pain came fast, bright, and deep. She bit down on it, but her breath stuttered. The cuffs snapped around her wrists with a bite so sharp she felt the skin tear beneath metal. Blood welled beneath the steel. It carried the sting of the past and the weight of a humiliation she had hoped her grandchildren would never experience. Isaiah Jenkins took a small step forward, torn between duty and conscience. But his feet froze as Keller tightened the second cuff. The power imbalance in the room felt ancient, familiar, and fierce. A young man in a navy suit stopped near the Tesla 2 spaces over. He stared, startled by the sight of a wealthy black woman restrained against a luxury car in one of the most exclusive garages in Manhattan. His phone came up almost by instinct. 90 seconds later, the video hit social media. 90 seconds was all it took for truth to spread faster than Keller's arrogance could contain it. A caption appeared beneath trembling hands. New York Police Department just brutalized the owner of Empire Tower for getting into her own car. She's black. She's bleeding. I'm shaking. The clip caught her calm, her dignity, her pain. It caught Keller's sneer, his dismissive tone, his presumption that authority belonged only to those who resembled him. The video took flight across the country before Keller even dragged her toward the waiting cruiser. Eleanor held her head high in the back seat as her wrists throbbed. She sat upright, spine unbroken by the weight of his assumptions. She drew a deep breath, steady and slow. She had survived worse than one officer's ignorance. She had survived the brutal death of her father. She had survived the early years of Hayes Tech when investors told her a black woman could never lead a cybersecurity empire. She had survived grief, discrimination, and storms of every kind. Tonight she would survive this too. She closed her eyes. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Preparation. She knew that a reckoning was coming for the man who had thrown her against her own car. She knew that truth had already left the garage through the shaky lens of a stranger's phone. Keller settled behind the wheel, self-satisfied and blind to the consequences already forming around him like storm clouds. He looked into the rearview mirror with a mocking grin. "You picked the wrong city to Grand Theft Auto in." "Grandma." Eleanor didn't answer. Her silence was its own warning. Her silence was the ground trembling before the collapse. He thought he had won something. He had no idea he had just ended his own life as he knew it. Officer Keller tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the cruiser pulled away from the private garage, his voice echoing through the cabin with sharp arrogance. "You should thank me," he said without turning around. "Most people your age don't get this much exercise." The sentence landed like another strike, and he would one day replay it in a courtroom as the moment the jury understood the cruelty behind his badge. In the back seat. Eleanor Hayes sat with her shoulders pulled tight, her wrists swelling against metal that cut deeper with every vibration of the road. Her chest ached where he had slammed her against the hood of her own Cadillac, and the red silk dress she had chosen for a quiet evening now held the memory of his violence. She kept her back straight. She kept her breath steady. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside the window, Midtown blurred by in streaks of gold and steel, unaware that within minutes the world would see what had been done to her. A young man in that garage had uploaded the footage with trembling hands. The clip struck the internet like a shockwave. People watched as a wealthy black woman in a silk dress identified her car, her garage, and her building, only to be ignored, dismissed, and brutalized. Viewers watched her hand over documents with dignity and patience, and then watched an officer call them fakes before twisting her rebuilt shoulder into metal. In less than 10 minutes, the video reached 1 million views before she arrived at the precinct. The hashtag Empire Tower Arrest climbed into the national spotlight. The comments pulsed with fury. "This is unlawful. This is racist. This is violence." Eleanor did not know the numbers yet, but she could feel the storm. She felt the weight of generations behind her. She felt the shadow of her father's final moments. Memories she carried like a scar beneath her ribs. For a moment, she closed her eyes, She remembered marching as a young woman with hands still trembling from grief. She remembered the cold water of fire hoses, the sting of tear gas, the sound of men screaming as batons came down. And now, after all these years, she sat cuffed in the back of a police cruiser for touching her own car in her own garage, in her own building that she partly owned. The history tasted the same. The humiliation carried the same burn. Keller drove as though he were delivering a trophy, not a human being. He hummed under his breath, the way some men whistle before cruelty. "You know," he said, adjusting the mirror so he could watch her face. "I've seen your type. Fancy dress, fancy car. The story never checks out." His tone held the stale confidence of someone who believed every assumption he ever made. Eleanor answered with silence. It was the only language strong enough to withstand the moment. Officer Isaiah Jenkins followed behind in the second cruiser. His hands shook around the wheel. Every few blocks he reached toward the radio, then pulled back. What could he say? How could he explain to Keller that the woman he had just assaulted was not only innocent, not only dignified, not only lawful, but was the mother of the highest-ranking officer in the city? He tried to picture the moment the truth would break open. He tried to picture the chief's face. His stomach tightened with fear. He knew what was coming. Keller did not. In the back seat. Eleanor leaned her head against the window for a single breath. It gave her a moment's relief from the pressure in her shoulders. Her wrists throbbed. Her fingers tingled. Pain spread in slow waves down her arms. The jolt of every pothole deepened the ache. She inhaled once, exhaled once. She steadied herself. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes required silence and stillness. She whispered to herself, barely audible. "This ends today." It was not a plea. It was a promise. As the cruiser pulled into the 5th Precinct, a cluster of officers outside paused mid-conversation. They watched the back door of the patrol car open. They watched Keller pull a 68-year-old woman onto her feet with a force that drew a quiet cough of pain from her throat. Her wrists were visibly bleeding. Her dress was wrinkled where he had shoved her. And yet she carried herself with a quiet grace that unsettled several officers who had seen far too much and expected far too little dignity from their detainees. One whispered, "Who is she?" His partner shrugged, but his eyes lingered on the blood. Inside the booking area, Sergeant Carla Lopez sat behind a metal desk. Typing without looking up, Keller announced, "Grand theft auto, fake registration, probably a whole scheme." He sounded proud. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice level and controlled. "My name is Eleanor Marie Hayes. Date of birth." Lopez's fingers froze over the keyboard. The name flashed through her memory, but procedure, and her own fear of making waves, pushed her to continue. She typed the name into the system. A bright yellow alert filled her screen. Family alert. Direct relative of New York Police Department employee. She hesitated for a heartbeat. Then she clicked override. It was a decision she would later deny making. It was a decision that would cost her a portion of her pension and years of quiet shame. Keller smirked as he watched Eleanor struggle to lower herself into the metal chair. Long day. "Huh?" he said. She looked at him with calm eyes. "You have no idea how long my day is about to become." The words carried no threat. They carried truth. And though he did not understand it, something in the room shifted. Lieutenant Marcus Hale walked in with a stack of forms. His voice was brisk, impatient. "Let's keep this simple. Sign the plea sheet. Misdemeanor unauthorized use. You're home by dinner." He slid the paper toward her as though her bleeding wrists were an inconvenience. Eleanor lifted her hands slowly. The cuffs pinched deeper. She let the silence speak first, then answered with steady clarity. "I will not sign anything. I will not confess to something I did not do." Her voice filled the room with a quiet authority that made Jenkins look down at the floor and made Keller stiffen with annoyance. Hale sighed. "Lady, you fight this and you're looking at felonies." Eleanor met his eyes without fear. "I still get my phone call." Hale gestured toward the wall. "Use the phone. Make it quick." The wall phone carried the stale smell of sweat and time. Eleanor lifted the receiver with trembling hands. Her wrists ached. Her shoulder pulsed, but her voice remained steady. She dialed a number she knew by heart. The call rang once. A calm, firm voice answered. "Chief Hayes." Eleanor breathed out. "Baby, it's Mama. I'm at the 5th. They seem to think I stole my own car." The silence that followed was heavy enough to stop the room. Officers turned, heads lifted. Something cold passed through the air. Then Olivia spoke, her tone dropping into a chilled, lethal calm. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not speak to anyone else. I'm 5 minutes out." And in that moment, the story shifted. Keller felt heat rush down his legs. He looked down. A dark stain spread across his uniform trousers. Shame arrived before understanding. He had just arrested the mother of the police chief of New York City, and she was on her way. Lieutenant Hale stared at Eleanor Hayes across the narrow interrogation table, the overhead light casting a hard line across his jaw as he slid another form toward her with a weary impatience that masked growing fear. "Last chance," he said, the words clipped and sharp. "Sign the plea sheet. You walk out tonight." Eleanor's wrists throbbed where the metal had chewed into her skin. Dried blood formed a dark line beneath the cuffs, but her voice remained steady. "I will not sign a lie," she answered. Hale pushed the paper closer, leaning in as though intimidation could erase truth. "Unauthorized use of a vehicle is the best offer you'll ever get. You want to fight this. You're looking at felony theft, resisting arrest, obstruction, and trust me, the district attorney won't hesitate." In that moment, he still believed she was only a wealthy woman caught in the wrong officer's crosshairs. He still believed the system he guarded would shelter him from accountability. He did not yet understand that her silence held more power than his threats. He did not understand that every word he spoke was being recorded, transcribed, and soon would be scrutinized under a federal lens. Eleanor looked at the plea sheet without touching it. "I want my phone call," she said. The firmness in her tone unsettled Hale more than he cared to admit. He gestured toward the wall. "Make it quick." The wall phone hung between old paint and stale memories, its cord twisted like a relic from another era. Eleanor rose slowly, her breath tightening from the pain in her shoulder. Each step toward the phone felt deliberate, purposeful. She lifted the receiver with careful fingers and dialed without looking. The number came from instinct, from years of calling her daughter not for help, but for connection. The line rang once. "Chief Hayes," Olivia answered, her voice steady and authoritative. Eleanor inhaled, holding her pain with grace. "Baby," she said softly, "it's Mama. I'm at the 5th. They seem to think I stole my own car." The silence that followed swallowed the room. Officers looked toward her, then toward one another, the shift in atmosphere immediate and chilling. Jenkins froze mid-step. Hale blinked twice, the meaning settling into his spine. Keller, standing near the doorway, felt his stomach twist before instinct forced his eyes downward. Warmth spread through the fabric of his uniform trousers, a humiliating reaction he could not stop. He had urinated in front of his peers at the moment the truth struck him. He had assaulted the mother of the chief of police, and Chief Hayes was coming. Olivia's voice returned, lower, colder. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not speak to anyone else. I'm 5 minutes out." Eleanor lowered the receiver with quiet precision and returned to her chair. Her posture was calm, composed. Her silence pressed on the room with more force than raised voices ever could. Keller stood rigid, breath shallow, eyes wide, knowing each passing second dragged him closer to consequences he could not outrun. Hale moved toward her with a forced authority that had begun to crack. "Look," he said. "Maybe we can sort this out before she arrives." Jenkins stepped forward, voice trembling, courage caught between fear and responsibility. "Lieutenant," he whispered, We should review the footage. We should." Hale snapped, "Not now." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. A cluster of officers gathered at the edge of the bullpen, drawn by a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. They whispered about the viral video already circulating online. The clip of Eleanor being slammed against her own Cadillac in a VIP garage that required a $10,000 per month lease just to enter. They had seen the comments spreading like wildfire. They had watched the number of views climb. They knew a storm was approaching, and they were standing in its path. Keller hovered near the wall, face pale, body tense. He replayed every moment of the arrest in his mind, each decision now sharpened by fear. He had ignored her documents. He had insulted her. He had tightened the cuffs until she bled. He had shoved her into her own car with a force captured on multiple angles. He had done it all with a body cam recording every word, every gesture, every assumption. He wanted to undo it, but time had hardened around him like concrete. Sergeant Lopez, sitting behind the booking desk, stared at the bright yellow alert she had overridden minutes earlier. Family alert. Direct relative of New York Police Department employee. The words glared back at her with the weight of a mistake she wished she could erase. She clicked through the screen again, heart pounding, knowing her decision would soon be questioned at every level of command. She had chosen convenience over caution, routine over responsibility. And now the cost approached in heels and authority, minutes stretched with suffocating heaviness. The room shifted from routine chaos to eerie stillness. Even the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to quiet. Keller wiped his palms on his soaked trousers, trying to hide the dark stain spreading into the fabric. Hale moved papers around the table to mask his rising anxiety. Jenkins stood beside the wall, hands clasped, waiting for the moment that would reshape his future. Eleanor sat still, her gaze fixed on a point no one else could see, her quiet dignity filling the room like a truth too heavy for denial. A distant siren grew louder. Tires screeched outside, doors slammed. Several officers straightened their uniforms instinctively. Though none dared speak, Keller's breathing grew shallow. Hale swallowed hard. Lopez pressed her hands together, whispering a silent prayer. Jenkins felt his heart race as the bullpen door swung open. Chief Olivia Hayes stepped inside with a cold authority that drew every eye toward her. She wore a black suit with a gold shield clipped near her heart, and her expression held the controlled fury of someone who had walked into the worst moment of her life and refused to break. Officers parted in silence as she approached the interrogation room. The moment she entered, the air shifted with the weight of her presence. She looked at her mother first. Eleanor lifted her chin, offering a small nod that carried both reassurance and shared pain. Then Olivia turned toward Keller and Hale. Her voice was calm, but each word held the precision of a blade. "Badges," she said, "on the floor." Keller's hands trembled. Hale blinked as though the command were a foreign language. Jenkins closed his eyes for a brief second, knowing everything was now in motion. But part of this moment belonged to Eleanor. She sat rooted in quiet strength as the room surrendered to the truth she had carried from the moment they laid hands on her. Olivia took a step closer, her voice steady as she addressed the officers who had humiliated her mother. "This ends tonight," she said, "every part of it." And the precinct stood still, held by a silence that announced the turning of a tide. Chief Olivia Hayes stepped into the 5th Precinct with a calm that felt colder than winter steel, and the entire room shifted around her as if the building itself understood that something irreversible had begun. She wore no dress blues, no ceremonial uniform, only a black suit and the gold shield that marked her as the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in New York City. Her face held a controlled fury, measured and precise. The look of a woman who had learned long ago to bury emotion beneath discipline until the right moment arrived. Tonight. That moment stood before her in the form of officers who had brutalized her mother. Every screen in the bullpen flickered as she entered. Body cam footage appeared on the monitors in unison, playing the arrest from multiple angles. Eleanor's calm voice filled the room, her dignified request. Her documents offered with patience. Keller's sneer, his disbelief, his grip on her arm, the violent twist of her rebuilt shoulder, the cuffs cinched until blood broke through skin. The silence that followed spread across the precinct like a shadow. Officers who had not witnessed the arrest now stared at the screens with growing discomfort. Watching their colleague disregard every rule meant to protect civilians. Watching the humiliation of a 68-year-old woman who had done nothing but enter her own car in her own garage. The air thickened with regret, guilt, and the quiet understanding that the consequences would be severe. Keller stood in the center of the bullpen as though nailed to the floor. His uniform trousers still bore the dark stain from earlier. His face was pale, tight with dread. He opened his mouth once, as if to speak, then closed it when Olivia's eyes landed on him. Lieutenant Hale straightened his posture, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed the panic growing beneath his careful facade. Sergeant Lopez hovered behind the booking desk, her hands clenched together. Officer Isaiah Jenkins stood near the doorway with a trembling shame carved into his expression. No one dared move when Olivia stepped fully into the room. She stopped exactly 3 feet in front of Keller and Hale, her stance controlled, her gaze sharp enough to cut through lies before they formed. She let the silence hold for a breath. Then her voice emerged with a calm that carried more force than any shout. Badges. On the floor. Keller blinked as though he had misheard her. Chief. He tried. But she did not allow the word to finish. Now. The single syllable came with an authority that brooked no argument. Keller's knees bent with a slow, unnatural stiffness. His hands shook as he unclipped his badge, the metal catching the fluorescent light before clattering onto the tile. Hale hesitated for half a heartbeat, then followed, removing his badge with a trembling hand. The moment the shields hit the floor, the power dynamic in the room shifted. Keller no longer stood as an officer. Hale no longer carried command. They were men stripped of authority by the weight of their own actions. Keller's voice broke. Chief, I have a wife, 2 little girls. His words wavered like a plea from a drowning man. Olivia's expression did not soften. So did half the women you stopped this year. She said, the only difference is that none of them were my mother. The sentence carried truth, not vengeance. It struck Keller with the cold impact of inevitability. He looked at Eleanor sitting in the interrogation room, her posture straight despite the pain in her shoulder, her wrists still bleeding. The clarity of her dignity cut deeper than any reprimand. Officer Isaiah Jenkins took 1 step forward, unable to hold his silence any longer. His voice trembled with guilt. Chief, he said, I should have stopped it. Suspend me. Fire me. Whatever you need to do. I failed her. Olivia studied him for a long moment. Her gaze was steady, thoughtful. You're not the reason she's bleeding, she said, but you will decide what you become after this. You will live to fix it. They won't. Relief and remorse mingled across his face. He nodded, unable to speak further. She turned back to Keller and Hale. Turn around. They obeyed. Their shoulders sagged, their hands lifted behind their backs with the trembling reluctance of men who finally understood the cost of their choices. Two officers, neither eager nor triumphant, stepped forward to cuff them with their own restraints. The metallic click echoed through the bullpen like a verdict. Keller swallowed hard, his breath shallow. Hale exhaled in a shudder, as though he had been holding fear with both hands. The officers marched them past rows of silent colleagues, each step stripping another layer of pride from their posture. Shame clung to them like a second uniform. Their own body cams recorded their walk of accountability as they were escorted toward the holding area. The television monitors continued to loop the footage of Eleanor's arrest. Officers who had once ignored Keller's attitude now stared at the screen with stunned silence. Some looked away, some watched every second, some whispered quiet apologies to no one in particular. Olivia stood in the center of the precinct, absorbing the weight of the moment. She did not revel in it. She did not gloat. She carried the gravity of a daughter fighting for justice, while sworn to uphold order. She turned toward the interrogation room and walked toward her mother. The door opened with a soft click. Eleanor lifted her gaze. Their eyes met with a tenderness that pierced through the tension. Olivia stepped close, her voice softening only for this single person. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor lifted her hands, showing the swollen wrists. "Only pride," she said, though the pain etched along her jaw told another story. Olivia reached out, brushing the edge of the cuff mark with gentle fingers. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment, her composure trembled, but she steadied it with the discipline of a lifetime. She spoke with quiet resolve. "This will never happen again." Eleanor answered with a small nod that carried love and endurance in equal measure. When Olivia stepped back into the bullpen, the silence followed her like a command. She addressed the remaining officers with measured authority. Every rule that protects the public was broken tonight, every safeguard ignored. This department will answer for it. Her tone remained composed, but each sentence pressed into the air with a clarity no one could forget. From this moment forward, transparency is not optional. Body cam footage will not disappear. Family alerts will not be overridden. And the days of shielding misconduct are over. She paused for a long breath. The precinct held its silence. Then she finished with a single line that echoed across the room with the weight of a vow. "This department belongs to the people it serves. Remember that." And in the quiet aftermath, every officer understood that the city had changed, and nothing would return to the way it had been before the woman in the red dress stepped into her garage, 8 months later. The Southern District of New York was filled to the edges with journalists, victims' advocates, civil rights attorneys, and ordinary citizens who had followed every moment of the case that began with a single body cam clip and a woman in a red silk dress. The courtroom stood under a tension that felt almost physical, as though every seat carried the weight of history. Officer Ryan Keller sat at the defense table with his attorney, shoulders slumped, hair thinned by stress, hands trembling beneath the surface of the polished wood. The arrogance he once wore like a second skin had vanished. What remained was a hollowed man who had seen his name dragged across every news channel in the country, who had watched his wife file for divorce, who had listened as colleagues testified about his past bias complaints, and who now faced a federal judge with a record of zero tolerance for civil rights violations. Lieutenant Marcus Hale sat beside him, pale and exhausted, blinking slowly as if his mind drifted between regret and disbelief. The viral footage played on a screen at the front of the courtroom. Eleanor's calm voice, her documents presented without hesitation, Keller's disdain, the violent twist of her shoulder, the cuffs cinched so tight that blood touched the chrome of her Cadillac, the humiliation she endured in silence. The courtroom watched in absolute quiet. Each second of the video carved deeper into its collective conscience. Judge Amara Washington entered with a deliberate stride, her presence commanding immediate respect. She carried the authority of decades spent sentencing men who believed the badge placed them above the law. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the courtroom, and then fixed her gaze on Keller. Her expression held no anger, only clarity, only the weight of the law. "Officer Keller," she said, her voice calm, "you assaulted a 68-year-old woman because her existence offended your worldview." The words struck like a gavel long before the real one sounded. Keller lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. "You dismissed her identity. You dismissed her documents. You dismissed her humanity." She paused, letting the silence deepen. "And you did so while wearing the uniform of a public servant." Keller's attorney shifted uncomfortably, but he did not interrupt. The evidence was irrefutable. The footage had reached millions. The truth had played across screens for months. The judge leaned back slightly. This court will not accept excuses. It will not accept half-truths. It will not accept pleas for leniency when the harm was deliberate, preventable, and rooted in prejudice. She lifted the sentencing order with steady hands. "Officer Keller, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole, and with a hate crime enhancement added due to the racial motivation evidenced in your statements and conduct." The room inhaled sharply. Keller's breath collapsed into a broken gasp. His knees buckled. His attorney grabbed his arm to steady him, but the moment was unforgiving. Tears ran down his face as the reality settled into his bones. His daughters, now in middle school, would visit him behind glass. His career was gone. His future was gone. The judge's words echoed as though they had been engraved on the walls. Justice requires accountability, and accountability begins here. Judge Washington then turned her gaze to Lieutenant Hale. Her tone remained firm. "Lieutenant Marcus Hale, you conspired to deprive a civilian of her rights by coercing a false plea agreement, disregarding a family alert, and ignoring clear evidence of innocence." Hale stared forward with haunted eyes. "The law you swore to uphold does not bend for convenience. It does not break for pressure. And it does not belong to those who view civilians as obstacles rather than citizens." She lifted the second order. "You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in federal custody, with immediate remand." Hale exhaled a slow, trembling breath. The sound was almost a release, as though months of dread had finally taken shape. He closed his eyes. The deputies stepped behind him. Eleanor sat in the front row beside Chief Olivia Hayes, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The scars from the cuffs had faded into soft lines, but the memory remained vivid. She watched Keller collapse into his seat, watched Hale lower his head, watched the gavel strike with a crisp finality that carried years of unspoken grief. She did not smile. Justice, for her, had never been about satisfaction. Justice had always been about truth. When Keller was led away in handcuffs, the same weight he had used to bruise her wrists, she did not avert her eyes. She held them steady, offering not triumph, but quiet sorrow. A sorrow born from understanding how many lives had been shaped by bias long before his badge ever touched his chest. As deputies guided Keller toward the courtroom door, he paused for a brief second. His eyes met Eleanor's. She held his gaze with a calm that felt like a verdict of its own. She did not hate him. She did not absolve him. She simply allowed him to see the dignity he had tried and failed to erase. Her silence spoke the truth he had never understood. Humanity does not bend for prejudice. It does not diminish under force. It does not break when pressed against chrome. It endures. The courtroom remained still as the officers were taken out through the side door. Judge Washington addressed the gallery with a tone meant for the record. This case demonstrates what occurs when authority becomes entitlement, when power forgets its purpose, when the uniform is used as a weapon rather than a shield. Her words carried the weight of a warning. This court expects every law enforcement officer to remember that justice is not a privilege. It is a duty. Olivia placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's arm, an unspoken affirmation that the long battle had reached its rightful conclusion. Cameras clicked quietly in the back rows, but none captured the quiet depth of the moment. A mother who had survived humiliation, a daughter who had fought with the full force of the law, a courtroom that bore witness. As they rose to leave, reporters whispered Eleanor's name with newfound reverence: Chair Emerita Hayes, civil rights survivor, mother of the chief. But she walked with the same steady grace she had carried all her life. When the courthouse doors opened to the cool autumn air, she paused for a single breath. Justice, she thought, was not the end. It was the beginning of the work that would follow. And as the cameras lit up around her, she stepped forward with quiet conviction, knowing the city would never again look at a woman in a red dress the same way. Keller entered Allenwood Federal Correctional Institution as a man who no longer recognized the reflection that met him each morning, and the slow unraveling of his former life began the moment the steel doors closed behind him. The echoes of the courtroom still lived in his mind, the judge's calm voice, the gavel striking like a sentence carved into stone, the sight of Eleanor Hayes watching him with sorrow instead of rage. He tried to sleep those first nights, but sleep came only in shallow gasps. The prison routine stripped him quickly: the early count, the rough fabric of the uniform, the loss of autonomy, the long hours of silence. Word of his case traveled fast. Inmates who had once feared the badge now saw a fallen officer, a man whose authority had dissolved the moment he misjudged a woman far stronger than he ever imagined. He received no visitors during those early weeks. His daughters no longer sent messages. His wife's divorce papers arrived with a crisp envelope and a short note that ended their 15-year marriage in 3 sentences. He folded the paper slowly, the finality settling into him with the weight of stone. He began writing a 12-page letter to Eleanor. An apology stretched across every inch of what remained of his conscience. He wrote about shame. He wrote about ignorance. He wrote about the moment he realized who she was, and who he had been all along. But when he finished, hands trembling, he sealed the envelope with the understanding that it would never undo what he had done. The letter left the prison. Eleanor received it months later. She placed it in her desk drawer and never opened it. The gesture was neither cruelty nor forgiveness. It was a boundary. She had nothing left to gain from his remorse. Lieutenant Hale served his shorter sentence differently. His health had always been fragile, a quiet truth he hid behind authority. Prison walls magnified the stress he had carried through the investigation, the trial, and the moment his badge hit the precinct floor. Within 2 years, his condition worsened. Doctors recommended early release for medical reasons. He stepped out of the institution with a paper bag of medication, a thin coat, and no home to return to. He found a small room above a laundromat in Jersey City, a place that smelled of steam and detergent. He lived in silence, taking part-time work wherever he could find it, stocking shelves, unloading trucks, answering phones for companies that never asked about his past. Each time someone recognized him, the job ended. He walked home with slow steps, carrying memories that pressed deeper than any sentence. He avoided the news because every mention of the Hayes case felt like reopening a wound. He had not written to Eleanor. He believed he had no right to ask anything of her, not even forgiveness. His days remained quiet, marked by the slow hum of washing machines beneath the floorboards. For the New York Police Department, the aftermath unfolded on a wider, louder stage. The viral clip had become emblematic of a deeper problem, and the city demanded change. The department could no longer respond with simple apologies or promises of review. Under pressure from the mayor, the city council, and the public, the New York Police Department convened hearings that lasted months. Officers testified, experts testified, civil rights groups testified, and through every session, the image of Eleanor in her red dress, pressed against the hood of her own Cadillac, wrists bleeding, played across screens as a reminder of what neglect looked like. The result was the Hayes Protocol, a sweeping reform that reshaped the department from within. Annual bias training increased from a few hours to a mandatory 40-hour program covering implicit bias, de-escalation, and the historical weight of policing black communities. Family alerts in the system, once easily overridden by rushed booking officers, became non-overrideable, locked behind administrative layers that only a chief-level command could access. Every officer's body cam footage uploaded instantly to a secure cloud that precinct supervisors could not alter or delay. Internal Affairs gained new authority to review footage within minutes of an arrest, and every new academy class watched the red dress arrest on the first day of training, learning the consequences of assuming guilt before truth. Some officers protested the new measures at first. They argued it made policing more complicated. They argued it created fear. They argued it limited judgment. But the quiet majority understood what the city required and what justice demanded. Over time, the reforms took root. Supervisors changed their procedures. Training officers rewrote their curriculum, and rookies entered the force knowing they carried not only a badge, but also the responsibility to avoid becoming the next headline. The Hayes Protocol was studied by other departments across the country. Some adopted pieces of it, others resisted. But the ripple effect was undeniable. The footage of Eleanor's arrest became a turning point, a moment used in lectures, in legal seminars, in community forums, and in conversations about accountability. The city had shifted, and the weight of that change rested on the decisions of one woman who had refused to bow under humiliation. For Eleanor, the story did not end in a courtroom or a mandate. She carried the memory of the arrest quietly. Her shoulder healed. The marks on her wrists faded. But a deeper ache lingered, not from injury, but from the recognition that even at 68, even with billions earned, even with a name etched into the city's skyline, she could still be dismissed, doubted, and manhandled because of her skin. She resumed her work at Hayes Tech as chair emerita, guiding younger leaders, mentoring women of color, and using her influence to expand cybersecurity access in underserved communities. She spoke at colleges. She met with civil rights groups. She donated to legal defense organizations. But she did not seek revenge. She sought purpose. She sought transformation at night. When the city lights flickered through the windows of her penthouse, she sometimes thought of her father and the Harlem sidewalk where she last saw him alive. She had built her life in defiance of that pain. She had built an empire that reached around the world. But the memory stayed with her like a quiet echo. Olivia carried her own burden. She knew every reform came with resistance. Every change came with pushback. Every decision carried weight. But she approached each day with the resolve of a woman who had stood in the precinct where her mother bled. She kept her shield close, her integrity closer. Some nights she visited her mother and sat quietly at the dining table, eating in a silence filled with gratitude and grief. She never forgot the moment she heard her mother's voice on the phone, soft and steady, saying she was in custody. Between mother and daughter, the bond deepened, not through tragedy, but through resilience. And as the city continued to evolve under the new protocol, their names became part of a story larger than any one courtroom, any one officer, or any one policy. The aftermath did not erase what had happened. It did not heal every wound, but it carved a path forward, one shaped by dignity, accountability, and the understanding that justice must be carried, preserved, and demanded with unwavering resolve. The autumn light fell across Central Park in soft gold, filtering through the last of the leaves as though the season itself wished to lay a gentle hand on the city after a year of upheaval. Eleanor Marie Hayes walked slowly along the path near the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Reservoir. Her steps measured, her breath easy in the cool air. Her wrists had healed, though faint lines still marked the skin where the cuffs once bit. Her shoulder ached only on cold mornings, a quiet reminder of the night she had been forced against the hood of her own Cadillac. But today, none of that held her back. Olivia walked beside her, the weight of the badge at her hip balanced by the peace she found only in her mother's company. They moved without hurry, letting the soft crunch of fallen leaves accompany their silence. The city around them pulsed with life, runners circling the reservoir, families crossing bridges, tourists feeding ducks. But for this hour, the world felt small, quiet, and safe. The work of the past 8 months had reshaped both of their lives. The trial, the sentencing, the new policies, the letters from victims who said the Hayes Protocol had spared them from what Eleanor endured, the gratitude, the tears, the anger, the exhaustion. Through it all, mother and daughter carried each other with the steady loyalty of two women who had survived different battles but shared the same wounds. They reached a bench overlooking the water, the surface rippling with soft reflections of orange and gold. Eleanor lowered herself onto the seat, smoothing her coat with deliberate care. Olivia joined her, the quiet between them filled with meaning rather than absence. After a long moment, Olivia spoke, her voice softer than the breeze. "I thought I was going to lose you that night." The words came from a place beneath her armor, a place she rarely allowed anyone to see. Eleanor turned toward her daughter with compassion warming her eyes. She lifted a hand and touched Olivia's cheek the way she had when her daughter was small. "I lost my father to a nightstick in 1968. She said gently, "I decided long ago that the story would not end the same way for us." The memory pressed into her voice, a combination of grief and strength. Olivia leaned into her mother's shoulder, letting herself rest in a way only Eleanor could permit. It was the first time she had done so since she was 10 years old. For a moment she felt the same safety she had felt decades earlier, curled against her mother during thunderstorms, across the field. 2 young black children played basketball with 2 female officers in Navy uniforms. Their laughter floated across the park like bright sparks of hope. Eleanor watched them quietly. "Look at that," she whispered. Laughter instead of fear. She breathed in slowly, letting the sight settle deep within her. That is what justice looks like. Baby. Not revenge, not rage. Justice is when a little black girl can see a uniform and think protector instead of enemy. We bought this city a little more time to get it right. Olivia swallowed hard. "Do you ever wish we could forget it happened?" she asked. Eleanor's answer came without hesitation. "No," she said. "If we forget, nothing changes." She let her gaze sweep across the water, the city skyline rising in the distance like a promise. Pain is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of vigilance. She paused. "But I do wish the world had not required you to fight for me." Olivia's eyes softened. "I would do it again. Every piece of it. Every hearing. Every reform. Every long night." She turned toward her mother. "You carried me through my childhood. I carried you through this." Eleanor smiled, the expression gentle and proud. "We carried each other." They sat in silence again, letting the truth of that statement linger. The breeze lifted a few leaves from the ground and sent them drifting across the path in spirals. soft reminders that time moved on even when hearts held still. Nearby, a young couple stopped to take a photograph of the reservoir. A jogger paused to tie a shoe. The world kept its rhythm. But in the quiet center of the park, mother and daughter shared a moment beyond movement. Olivia breathed deeply. "Mama, this city is different now." Eleanor nodded. "Because you made it different." Olivia shook her head. "Because of what happened to you?" Eleanor considered that, then answered with wisdom shaped by decades of struggle. "Change is never born from comfort. It comes from the moment we decide not to hide." She glanced at her daughter. "You did not hide. Neither did I." The sunlight touched her hair, turning a few silver strands to bright white. "I have lived long enough to know that progress comes in waves, not miracles. But this wave carried us farther than most." She reached for Olivia's hand, and we stood our ground. Far behind them, a group of teenagers recognized Olivia and whispered among themselves, then waved shyly before walking on. Olivia offered a small nod. "Even they know," Eleanor said quietly. "They know the name Hayes stands for something now." Olivia looked down at their joined hands. "Your name always stood for something," she said. "Now the city finally understands it." A soft quiet settled again. The water shimmered, the sky burned with warm color. Eleanor leaned back against the bench and let her eyes rest on the place where skyline met reservoir. "When all this began," she said, "I thought only of survival. I did not imagine it would reshape the department, the training, the policies, the way officers see their duty." Olivia looked at her mother with a mix of pride and sadness. "It reshaped me too," she said. "Every day I walk into that precinct and remember what was done to you. It keeps me honest. It keeps me vigilant. It keeps me human." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "And that, my love, is why you will lead this city into something better." A gentle wind rose, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. The two children finished their game and high-fived the officers before running off. The officers continued down the path, talking quietly, their silhouettes reflecting in the fading light. Eleanor watched them go. "There will always be those who resist change," she said. "But there will also be those who embrace it. That is enough." Olivia nodded. "It has to be." The sun dipped lower, brushing the tops of the trees with fire. Eleanor stood slowly, steady on her feet. Olivia rose beside her. For a moment they simply looked at the water, the skyline, the slow drift of the season. Then Olivia slipped her arm around her mother's. Eleanor leaned gently into her daughter's warmth. Together they walked along the winding path, the city unfolding around them with each step, and as they moved forward. Eleanor carried a quiet faith that the reforms born of her suffering would protect others long after she was gone. Every leaf that fell seemed to whisper the same truth. Justice was not a final destination. It was a practice, a promise, and a legacy. And in that golden autumn light, mother and daughter stepped into the future with dignity, resilience, and a shared vow that the city would never again forget the woman in the red dress. Thank you for listening to this story today. If it meant something to you, please subscribe, leave a like, and share it so more people can hear it.